To talk to you about one dimension of the economic side of the campaign, and that dimension that I will talk about is the broad processes of regulation and deregulation that are occurring in the economy today. And so to understand what some of these policy issues are at the moment, what we really need to do is to step back and think about this the way an economist would think about this. Sort of what does an economist think of when the words regulation and deregulation come up, and how do those apply then in the context of the current banking situation? How does it apply in some of the other kinds of regulation and deregulation issues that are likely to come up in the next presidential administration? So if you ask most economists, what do you think of when you think about regulation? I think that they would respond in the following way. The way to think about regulation is that in general, in most circumstances, markets are relied on to work in a way that serves the public interest. In many, many situations, markets left to their own devices will generate high levels of social welfare. But there are certain situations where markets cannot be relied on to achieve either high levels of economic efficiency or levels of equity in the economy, and some kind of intervention is going to be required. And situations of that sort are usually referred to as market failures, situations where competitive markets do not result in efficient or equitable outcomes. So what are some of the kinds of situations in which market failures arise, where regulation might be needed? Economists tend to organize those market failures around a series of headings. And so one of those headings is monopoly and monopoly power. If you're in a situation where there's a lot of competition, lots of different people who are on the buyer side of the market, a lot of people on the seller side of the market, the likelihood of efficiency at the end of the day is much higher than if you have just one seller and lots of buyers, or one buyer and lots of sellers. So market power is one kind of situation which often leads to market failure. A second kind of situation would be what economists call externality. A factory might be located in Illinois. It sends out smoke, goes over Lake Michigan, and arrives in the state of Michigan. Well, if this is regulated by citizens of the state of Illinois, they're not so much worried about the smoke because it's not affecting their homes or their children. But people in the state of Michigan are. The problem is that the people in Michigan don't vote in Illinois, so the policies are not necessarily going to be optimal in a setting like that. Some kind of overarching regulation might be needed. Third area might be in the area of what economists call public goods, where instead of having something like one of my favorite goods in the economy, a crushed peanut donut, when I eat the crushed peanut donut, that means it's not available to somebody else to eat. But of course, that kind of process is true of many goods, but it's not true of goods like, say, bridges, where once you build a bridge, the fact that one person can drive over this bridge does not exclude in any way the opportunity for other people to drive over the bridge. And so the way you need to allocate resources to bridges may be very different from the way you need to allocate them to crushed peanut donuts. Markets may be good for crushed peanut donuts. They may not be so good for figuring out how many bridges to build. So the point that I want to raise here fundamentally is when you talk about regulation to an economist, that economist is likely to be asking, is there a market failure here? And if there is, what is the appropriate regulation to deal with that market failure? Now, when you think about this general mindset and you apply it now to regulation and deregulation in the American economy, it gets you pretty far historically in terms of understanding what the origins of regulation are, which sectors of the economy got regulated and which ones didn't. So, for example, in the period between World War II and roughly, say, 1975, so for the quarter century after World War II, two of the industries that were fairly tightly regulated in the United States were the telephone industry and the electricity industry. And a reason for that was that these were industries where it was felt that competition was not going to work very well. There was not likely to be more than one seller. Once one seller strung up a bunch of wires, and of course telephone messages were transmitted by wire in those days for the most part, indeed entirely, that once one set of wires were up, there weren't going to be competing firms setting up lots of different sort of networks of wires. So you were likely to have a situation of what economists call natural monopoly. A monopoly which may even be desirable, but then it has to be regulated. So the telephone business was regulated, the electricity business was regulated in the United States. Similarly, most bridges, not all bridges, we have here in the Detroit area, one of the bridges across from Detroit to Windsor is actually privately owned. But most bridges in the United States are owned by the government because these are public goods in the sense that I described that earlier. And then the third major area of regulation, other than natural monopoly and public goods, that we had in the economy as it existed after World War II was to deal with another kind of market failure that I didn't mention a moment ago, which is a market failure that economists refer to often as one that comes from asymmetric information. And so what do I mean by asymmetric information? What I mean basically is a situation where the people on the one side of the market know a lot more about the good than people on the other side of the market. And what some people don't know could actually harm them quite a bit. So let's go back to my favorite product, the crushed peanut donut. And when we think about crushed peanut donuts, I could walk into a bakery, I could see the donuts, and maybe I've never been to that bakery, and so I don't know exactly what the recipe was that was used to make those donuts. If I buy one of the donuts and I try it, and well, it's just not as good as the crushed peanut donuts of my dreams, well, that's one donut I've had. I didn't like it so much. It's no big deal. I don't even have to finish eating the donut. So in a situation like that, normal learning through using the market mechanism, going down that supermarket aisle, trying this cereal this week, another cereal another week, that's fine, that's great. That's in fact what makes life interesting, is trying new products all the time and discarding the ones that are not so good and retaining the ones that one really likes. But of course, if we're talking about a medicine, and the medicine has a very harmful side effect, and we don't know about it, and we try it, and we experience that side effect, it's not good enough to say, well, I won't have that one next time. Maybe the side effect was so important that it creates in us an irreversible situation, a permanent damage to our body just from that one trial. And so in a situation like that, this notion of experimentation is something that is not the way we would want to organize the economy. And that's why medicines and certain kinds of foods are subject to regulation before they can be offered for sale in the market. And the fundamental reason is because the manufacturer knows what went into those products, but the consumer doesn't necessarily know what went into those products and whether they would be harmful or not. So asymmetric information is another kind of problem that leads to regulation. Okay, now we begin to, with that sort of as our conceptual baggage, we can begin to think about policy issues. So from a policy perspective, the idea would be this. If economists were running the world, they would look for all of those markets where there was some kind of market failure, and they would choose the right kind of regulation for asymmetric information problems, or the right kind of regulation for market power kinds of problems, or the right kind of regulation for externality problems, different problem, different solution, and they would apply those remedies, much as a doctor would take the relevant pill out of the black bag and apply it in the context of the particular malady that might exist in a particular setting. And what that would also imply is that if economists were running the world, that if there were changes over time in the technology of an industry or in the tastes of consumers, that there might be a change in the regulatory regime. That we might go from a situation which is a natural monopoly, where we have wires that would have to be strung to transmit telephone messages, to a situation where we suddenly don't need wires anymore.